to call you my friends. They're people that I never knew before we came here, and it's just amazing. We come around the corner, oh, hey, how are you? And I love it. I absolutely love it. And I think we all come together every week because we have to learn how to deal with everything that's going on day by day. And I think it helps coming to see a group of people and talk to a group of people that understand where we're coming from and have shared visions for what we really want for our country.
Thank you for making it happen.
Mike calls it group therapy.
Thank you for making it happen.
Well, thank you. It was Alberta's idea, and she hooked me in here. But it's so valuable that we do this. People are amazed every week that we do this. And we've had speakers every single week for over a year and a half now. It's just, and it's really been amazing. So, we were mentioned in City Beat this week. All right, we'll take it. We'll take it.
So, we're way more progressive than the Democratic Party.
Yes, we are way more progressive than the Democratic Party, absolutely. So we had a great Labor Day celebration yesterday down at Coney, as hot as Hades, but you know, we were there, it was great at Coney, and we started off with Mary Catherine Ricker, who is a Vice President with the American Federation of Teachers. And she was talking about the 1.7 million members, that it's really important that we pay attention to what's coming down the pike. And Jerry Springer, I think, ended it with basically saying, 2018, we have to take back 2018 or else there won't be a 2020 for us to deal with. 2018 is incredibly important. Yes?
Somebody's driving a black Mazda, DCF 8879, they got me blocked.
Black Mazda. All right, it's our speaker. I'm so sorry. That's quite all right.
You did right.
That's right. Do it again. Just make sure you vote. Hallelujah. Yeah. And speaking about that, next week we have Pastor Leslie Jones who's going to be here. And she is really working very hard to, on the Reading Road corridor, to get out the vote. Get people registered and get out the vote. So she's going to come to us and kind of like the idea of how did Georgia get the African American vote out? And so she's going to come to speak to us about what she is doing and how we can really, they may be registered, but we don't get them to the polls to vote. So Leslie's going to be with us, and I think that's something we really need to listen to. The following week after that is Ginger Bach. She will be here. She is running for the appellate court. She's going to talk about the appellate cases. Everybody thinks the appellate court doesn't apply to you, but the cases that affect you and me that have been heard in the appeals court. And she's going to be joined by several of the other folks. Funny story from yesterday at the CFT tent. Julie Sellers is our union president. She's pretty aggressive. And Miller, who is running against Pierre Bergeron, walks into the CFT tent and starts wanting to talk to our members. She gets in his face and says, "We didn't endorse you. You are not allowed to talk to my people. Get out of here." And he went and slinked off. Hallelujah. You know, I mean, and Hartman did the same thing. He had signs everywhere. Hartman, he's running against Tom Baradon. He just wants to be kept in judge, but he doesn't want to do anything except put signs out there. So, you know, we got some work to do. And at the end of the month, we're going to have Brian Gary who's going to come out, and he's going to bring several of the folks that are part of the Homeless Coalition. Actually, the guy that calls himself the mayor, that really works with folks day by day in the homeless community. So that's what we've got for the next couple weeks, and then I'll fill you in on October when I get it scheduled. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
It wasn't you. It wasn't Don.
I'm innocent.
He's innocent.
He was innocent. Did they find the person? Did they find the car?
I think they so.
Think so. Think so. Don't want to have anybody permanent. Okay. Regular run-of-the-mill announcements. restrooms are just outside to the back. We have this room until 2 o'clock. So if Don Mooney isn't smart enough to leave right away at the end of his, at 1 o'clock, he will, if he doesn't disappear, then you can talk to him and ask him additional questions after 1 o'clock. Because people are always upset when I cut this thing off at 1 o'clock. Okay, everybody should have a name tag. If you don't have a name tag, please get one. We are pretty good about name tags, and we get them to people who ask for them. If you want a round button, please go sign one up on the table in the back. Just some announcements. I am Alberta Hemsley, and I am really happy that all of you guys are here. Just a moment. Stanley is in the back with the video camera. He videos this, you know. If you don't want to do video, tell Stan. And we will have those available next week for you if you missed this or your friends missed this. We have Carol. Where's Carol? Carol Madden. She's here somewhere. There she is, right at the back. She helps put out stuff and put away stuff. She's really very invaluable to our group. Okay, and let's see. Let's get to some announcements. And the first one who has her name up, ready? Marlena.
Hello again. I apologize. My allergies are kicking my butt right now. But I have to say that all those times I said I was going to run for Cincinnati Public School Board, it's for real. I have my nominating petitions with me to be on the ballot for 2019. If you are a registered voter that lives in the Cincinnati Public School District and you would like to sign, I would greatly appreciate that. And thanks to this group for being such a strong source of moral support for me so much.
We'll be there for you. Other announcements from other groups? Come on, he hasn't eaten dinner yet. You've got to give something. No. Here. Yep, here we go.
I saw Susan Namey walk in with several half-tab yard signs, so I think if you need a yard sign, if you have a good location, or a bad location, talk to Susan, or just grab one, heck.
I'm going to take two. I want to mention Peter here. Raise your hand, Peter. Raise your hand. This is Peter. He does our newsletter. If you want a newsletter, make sure you sign up with Peter. And he has these little cards. And if you have an announcement from another group, please make sure that he gets a little card with your information on it.
Hi, I'm Ann Chasser, and I have street signs for Richard Cordray. So don't take one, take two, take three, give them to your friends. We want to see them all over the city. Thanks.
I'd love to see them finally. I actually have them.
We also have packed run signs back here, Jim Miller and ASCAP, so please take your signs out there. People are visual learners. If they see that name as they go into a voting booth, they will remember that.
Good. Other announcements? Other announcements? I think we did it. I'm going to turn this one off. Without further ado, we have with us, wait a second. I have Don Mooney. Yeah, right. Don't laugh. That's a picture of Notre Dame where he did his undergraduate work, and a picture of UC where he did his judicial training. Right, and he's a retired partner from Ulmer and Burns, and he's now retired, but he's doing the really good work now of working with Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, which is really important in our school system, in our whole system. So without further ado, here is Don Mooney.
It's great to see some familiar faces here and also some faces maybe not so familiar, or maybe at age 67 that I've just forgotten. So you have to forgive me for that. A little about me. I've been involved in politics, almost completely Democratic politics, since the early 1970s. Yes, ma'am. Hold it closer. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Pointed at me. All right. Okay. Since the early 1970s here. And it was funny to see Jerry Springer at the Labor Day picnic yesterday. When I was in law school, I would drive him. I was like one of his drivers on his campaign for city council. We'd go to bowling alleys and bingos. I can remember the Western Bowl with about 50 lanes, and by the time we walked out of Western Bowl and Jerry had worked each lane and talked to almost every bowler in the place, you know, the ringing sound of that roll crash were in my ears until the next morning. I've been a delegate to the Democratic Convention for people like Ted Kennedy, Michael Dukakis, Walter Mondale, and most proudly Barack Obama. And and I've sort of passed the torch, I thought, to my daughter Maureen, who many of you met maybe on the Obama campaign. She was a field coordinator here for the Obama campaign. Started with that campaign when it was maybe 5 or 6 employees, and ended up working on the staff of Vice President Biden in the White House for many years until she went to grad school. And she's kind of pining for a Biden presidential campaign, which I think would be pretty nice myself. But the reason I'm here today is I have been involved in city politics for a long time, and so I thought I would talk a little bit about the upcoming ballot issues, the charter amendments that are going to be on the ballot. We're all going to be paying attention to the up-ticket items like the governor's race and the U.S. Senate race. But if you stick around and get down ballot, and if you live in the city of Cincinnati, you're going to be able to make some interesting choices on what our city government and mayor's races are going to look like in years to come. And we have a tendency to kind of tinker with our election system. It's never perfect, and everybody aspires to perfection, I guess. But there are some interesting issues that I think will impact the types of candidates who will be successful, and progressive Democrats like the folks in this room should be paying close attention. The one I'm most involved with involves what I call the LLC loophole. And the LLC is a form of a business organization. You may read about it. It's called Limited Liability Company. And a lot of people have them. If you own a small business, the way my wife does, you probably have an LLC. Lawyers have something similar called limited liability partnerships. But where they are put to use most these days is for real estate developers. Now, back in, I want to make sure I get my dates and numbers right. Back in 2001, a group of citizens got together to put Cincinnati's campaign finance laws on the ballot. And Jane Anderson is here. She was one of the organizers of that group. It was a group that included the NAACP, the Charter Committee, the League of Women Voters, the Women's City Club, and it was led by Jane, along with former council member Marion Spencer and former council member Pete Strauss. And the reason why they put it on the ballot is that a small group of very wealthy people had been spending large sums of money to make sure that the candidates for city council and mayor that they favored had a leg up. And of course, the biggest donor in those days was Carl Lindner and his family, and there was no limit on the amount of money that you could contribute to a city council campaign, so it was not unusual for a favored candidate of the Lindner family to get $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, which in those days, quite frankly in these days, was not chump change. It would really help influence a close election for city council particularly when we're electing 9 people, and a few extra $1,000 can make a difference. So Jane and other people, those folks I described, got together and put on the ballot a measure that barely passed. It wasn't, there were some aspects about it that were controversial and some not so controversial, but the least controversial one was a limit on how much you could contribute in a city council race. And it was basically $1,000 per campaign cycle. So if you ran for city council and you were running in 2 years, during the 2 years prior to the election, you could get no more than $1,000 from Carl Linder or any member of his family or anyone else in town. And if you were running for mayor and if you had a primary, you could give $1,000 in the primary and $1,000 in the general election. And that all sounded great, and it passed, and everybody thought the problem, at least of overly aggregated contributions, had been solved. And then in 2005, at the request of Councilman Cranley at the time, the city solicitor, the Federal Elections Commission, or the Cincinnati Elections Commission, which was the group set up by that charter amendment to oversee campaign finance issues, was quietly asked, well, does that $1,000 limit apply to limited liability companies? Aren't they persons too? So, okay, let's step back for a second. Under Ohio law, which has its own rules limiting contributions to statewide and legislative candidates, you can get a check from an LLC, but it has to be attributed to the person or persons that own that LLC. So as an example, if you can only give $1,000 to a governor's candidate, and you write a check for $500 from your LLC, and you write another check for $1,000 from your own bank account, that violates the law because it's more than $1,000. And the LLC contribution counts as if it came out of your checking account. Well, when the Elections Commission was asked this question, they came out with a different result, but they did so very quietly. It was never published in the newspaper, and it really didn't become apparent, quite frankly, until the campaign against John Cranley and Roxanne Qualls some years ago, when suddenly all this LLC money was showing up. And so what happened is that if you're a real estate developer and you own 10 LLCs, you could give $11,000. You could write a check from each of your LLCs and also from your own account. So in essence, LLC owners were allowed to supersize their donation limits. But sadly, no one really even thought about it when Roxanne was running against John Cranley the first time. No one said, what's this about? I think the Roxanne campaign, maybe they were taking advantage of it too, I don't know. But no one asked me or Jane or any other people that I know of, hey, is this right? Is this consistent with the amendment that we passed? Well, we did start looking at it, and I will confess, I supported Yvette Simpson, and I was following this, and I said, well, wait a second, what are all these donations? Initially, they weren't even reporting from the Cranley camp who these LLC owners were. They would list dozens of LLCs, each making $1,000 contributions, and no one knew who owned those LLCs. You'd have to go to the Secretary of State's office.
It's up to 1,100 now.
Right,
It
yes.
was in that campaign.
Exactly, it was adjusted for inflation, so now it's up $1,100 per person.
Yeah.
So we started doing some research, we filed a complaint with the Ohio Elections Commission, and they, as a result of that, we got them to disclose who owned these LLCs. And what we found is that there are about 70 people, 70 owners of LLCs, who over the course of the campaign, counting the general election and the primary, donated more than $500,000 to the mayor's campaign. And that amounted to about $400,000 more than we thought was legal. We thought they should be limited to $1,100 per person, counting their LLC donations. And here's an example of that.
What was that,
Uh,
70 people?
About 70 developers, maybe it was 71 or 72, contributed more than $500,000 to the mayor's campaigns for the primary and the general election. There's one example I'll give you. There's a guy named Tom Williams, who's a well-known corporate guy in town. He owns North American Properties, and through his personal and LLC accounts, he gave $17,000 for the primary and $15,000 for the general election, so $32,000 together rather than what we thought was legal, $2,200. So bottom line is, we filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit is still pending, but as a result of the lawsuit, we have prompted council to put on the ballot this article, this charter amendment. We don't have any numbers yet, soon we will, but so I can't tell you it's issue 5 or issue 6, but it's going to be on the ballot that would, in essence, close that LLC loophole, make it very consistent with Ohio law, so that if you own multiple LLCs, you still can only donate $1,100, including those LLC donations. And I would urge each of you to think about whether you want LLC owners to have that right to supersize their donations. I think what's interesting about it is really there's no limit. It doesn't cost that much money to form an LLC, maybe a couple $100 in legal and administrative costs, and you could create 100, 150, 200 LLCs to donate as much money to a candidate as you want. In our view, that's not consistent with the public's interest. It would allow too few people to have too much influence in the campaign. In contrast, those of us who are employees really are only allowed to donate $1,100. So why should those owners of LLCs have some rights that exceed our own? Go ahead.
But LLCs are really
We
self-regulatory.
need the mic.
The whole point of having an LLC is that somebody doesn't know who owns it. So when you file the paperwork, you can have somebody else file it and sign everything, so you don't know. It's self-regulatory though, what you're proposing.
Well, under Ohio law, you have to disclose who the owners are, and I guess if someone lies, then that's fraud, and that can be pursued in some other way. But you do have to disclose who owns the LLC if you make a donation. And
Only there, but not when you go to the Secretary of
right,
State's
not
office.
when you go to the Secretary of State.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah,
So
right.
there's no way to trace it back by checking the Secretary of State's
Right,
office. It's self-regulatory.
Mhm, that's true, yeah.
On the campaign finance reports, you have to say who owns it.
Yeah.
That's what he just said.
Yeah, because I had to do that for every,
Okay, so anyway, that's why we're encouraging folks to vote for this amendment to close that loophole. We think it will, the sources of money influencing elections, you close one hole and they seem to ooze out of another. So it's hard to completely solve the problem, but we think at least this would hold more people accountable and not make it unfair for employees or folks that don't have multiple LLCs. There are a couple of other charter amendments on the ballot, and I'll talk about those right now. Over the years, we've had arguments about how to elect council, how long their term should be. Even going back some time ago, we had proportional representation where you could kind of count your ballot in a weighted way. And this year, let me go back a little history. I think it was about 2015, maybe 2014, when on the ballot we had the option to change our 2-year terms to 4-year terms. Up till, from 1927, when the charter, encouraged by the Charter Committee and Murray Season and those people, was adopted, we elected council members by 2-year terms. And back was it, I forget the year, was it 2014, Jane, when we voted for the 4-year term?
I remember going and logging against doing straight.
Yeah, I voted against too. But one of the council members jumped on board the notion of 4-year terms, and the theory was that that would make people more inclined to work as council members, at least for a while, before they went back to raising money and campaigning. So the 4-year terms passed. Again, it was close, but almost immediately thereafter, people started complaining. As I recall it, the first 4-year council term was the year, I guess it would be 2013, when Mayor Cranley won, and the issue immediately became, should we cancel the streetcar? And there were a couple of council members who, in the view of the streetcar opponents, had flip-flopped on the issue. And of course, those people said, we should have council elections immediately because they wanted to throw the bums out. And so there was discussion. We had 4 years go by. We just elected council to another 4-year term. And now we're going to have on the ballot the issue of, okay, what should we do? Is this really a good idea? And there are 2 proposals that are going to go to voters in November. One would be, let's just go back to the old-fashioned 2-year terms for everybody. Another would be, let's elect council members to 4-year terms, but let's stagger the terms. And as a practical matter, it would work out this way, and I may have a little of the details confused, so if somebody knows better, please correct me. If this were to pass, we would have the next city council election in 2021, is that correct? Okay. So that would be, everybody would get to serve a 4-year term. And then we would have an election where we would elect 4 council members, we'd re-elect 9 council members in 2021 because we wouldn't want to just have only 4 council members. So we'd have a new election in 2021. We would elect 9 council members, but only 4 of those would be for 4-year terms.
The top 5 vote getters.
Right, would be for 4-year terms. And the people who came in 6, 7, 8, and 9 would only be elected to 2-year terms. So they would have to go back to 2-year, they would run again in 2023 for a 4-year term. Now, every good-hearted proposal, if you look a little deeply, you can see some potential problems. And to me, the potential problem with this is who's most likely to finish in the top 4 or 5. Typically, in our city council elections, the folks who do the best, 1, have the most money, and 2, are more likely, and I think I'm right on this, more likely to be white males. Now, that's not always the case. Certainly Roxanne Qualls did well when she ran after a few years, but going forward, how likely it is, if we only elect 4 out of or 5 council members every 4 years, how likely are those new people, how likely is it going to be that a Tamaya Denard, as an example, breaks into the top 4 or 5 the first time they run? Right, yeah. Was she in the, where did she fill last time?
She was in the top 5.
Was she?
Amazingly.
Okay.
She was.
Yeah. I'm just saying, over the years, historically, women and minority candidates haven't usually, in the first time they run for office, finished as high as 4 or 5. Now, there's not going to be any limit on the number of candidates who are allowed to run, so in theory, we could still have 15, 20 candidates for city council, but only the top 4 or 5 candidates are going to win under this new proposal. Go ahead.
Just 2 questions. One of them is, unless I misunderstood, does that mean that there will be perhaps 4 or 5 candidates at the beginning of this process who will have a 6-year term?
I think, will some people be allowed to? No, they won't be elected to 6-year terms.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
de facto, because of being there.
Everybody would have to face reelection.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
The other question is, what is the possible reality of getting PR on the ballot? We did it for 30 years, it worked extremely well.
You know, the trouble with, and I would have no problem with PR. I think historically the problem with it is it's hard to explain it to voters. I mean, just think of all the trouble I had trying to explain how we're going to roll into 4-year staggered terms. When you try to explain how PR votes are counted to people, it can get very confusing. And I think in the past, opponents of PR, and they've mostly been Republicans, I think, have always been able to kind of demonize that system as some tricky way of denying minority voters their rights.
But if you call it things like ranked choice or instant runoff, it becomes a little more comprehensible.
Jane, maybe you know the answer to this question. Was this on the ballot in the last 20 years? Did someone who
To
put...
go back, there have been attempts, yes.
Yeah.
Periodic attempts to get, and I can guarantee the eyes glazing over routine. Whether I've tried to explain it to students, when I taught state and local politics, how some communities use it, the eyes glaze over. When I've done it trying to work on behalf of it to potential voters, the eyes glaze over. It's very simple, except that the explanation of how it works is very complicated. So, you know, you can't get around that. So the odds of, doing it anytime soon are
It's
slim.
done quite well. I think it got within 5 percentage points one time and within 2.5 the second time, but Dan knows
It's
much
not what we're
better.
doing now. So it's
It
not
was on the ballot in
No.
2008, and it got 47.25%.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Wow, it's not good enough.
Are they term limited? Is city council term limited?
Yes, yes. Two
It is.
4-year terms.
But I'm wondering, has anyone figured out how this, because when we went to 4-year terms, that had that had the effect of giving some of the candidates an extra 2 years beyond what their original term limit would be, as I recall. Is this new charter amendment, the staggered terms, going to affect people's term limits?
No,
Okay.
it will not do that. But originally, when the switchover was first made, it did impact on that. So some ended up being able to serve a maximum of 10 years on council
Right.
because of the complicated nature of the switching over. So, yeah, but this one won't, because again, some of them are going to have to run again in 2 years.
Right.
And then they're going to have to, after those 2 years, then they can run for a 4-year term. So it's not going to have the same kind of impact as when it first got introduced, because there was no staggering involved. I will say this, that in most communities that do the staggered terms, there's always a kind of uneven numbers of people on council, so you don't end up with constant ties for this side or the other. So you usually have an uneven number of members of council running. And the usual, say, if you have 9 members of council running in any community, you would do the mayor and 4 members of council, and then the next time around in the staggered interim, you do the 5. So it'd be, you'd have, but that's not what's being proposed here. So, for whatever, it's the mayor and 5, not the mayor and 4, and then 4, instead of the mayor and 4, and then 5. So just for whatever that's worth, when all the political scientists make recommendations about doing this, they would have recommended the mayor and 4 and then 5, but that's not what we have. So whatever difference that makes is, that's what it is.
As an old-time political junkie who's followed city politics for a while, I don't know about you, but I really missed that election when every 2 years when we elected 9 council members. Now maybe the candidates like not having to be out there every 2 years. It gives them a break, and I understand their need for that. But from the voters' point of view, it's kind of nice to be able to hold them accountable.
That's right.
And I'm concerned about the effect on who gets to finish in that top 4 or 5. I think sometimes some really good candidates can squeeze in when we elect 9. Now, maybe sometimes some not so great candidates squeeze in when we elect 9. I'm thinking Jeff Passer.
Yes.
Well, one thing I didn't hear anybody ask, but it's important, and that is, there are two things on the ballot. You're gonna get to vote on two of them. So you're gonna get to vote on both 2-year terms and 4-year staggered. Whichever one gets the highest number of votes will be the one that gets implemented. Because, I mean, it's unheard of, as far as I know, to have both of them on the ballot at the same time.
It means people can vote for both?
People can vote for both, and if everybody did that, you'd end up with a tie, and who knows what we'd end up with, a lawsuit for sure. But if one of them gets a few more votes than the other, that's the one that will be implemented. It's very strange. I think we also maybe need to look at who wanted it on the ballot, which of the council people wanted on the ballot, and look at reasons why that might have been there. And the Republicans are the ones who really wanted the 2-year terms back on the ballot, because they didn't do as well as they would have liked. And certain Democratic candidates wanted the 4-year staggered. So I think we need to kind of look at that and think about, maybe the motives, I don't know.
If both lose, then we stay with the current system that we have now. Dot, you want to borrow that?
If you want to keep the current system, then you vote no on both. But what does win or lose mean? More than 50% on either one of them?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think you would need 50% for either one of them to pass. It's not like who gets the most votes. If it's less than 50%, they both lose, yeah.
50% plus one vote.
Right. It's kind of crazy.
People who vote.
Go ahead, there's a question back here.
That's always the case.
I'm still concerned about the amount of money that goes into these elections. And I've heard things about Cranley getting an awful lot of money, not counting the LLCs.
Right.
And also Sittenfeld. So how does that stop?
Well, I think the best we can do is limit the size of individual contributions. I mean, we can't tell people you can't give to Paul Sittenfeld or to PG Sittenfeld.
But what I mean is, with what's going on throughout the country and money pouring in all over, I mean, is that happening with local?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
He's
yeah.
just term limited, he won't run again.
Oh, I know he's term limited, but you've got other people that are going to put up. And I'm thinking of Sittenfeld too, because he got a lot of money, and it wasn't all local.
Right, yeah, I mean, you can't really, the Supreme Court has done a pretty excellent job of allowing money to flow into campaigns. So you can't impose restrictions on who can donate to, it'd be nice if we could say, hey, you can only live in Cincinnati to contribute to campaigns in Cincinnati, but I think that would violate the First Amendment.
So what's the use of the LLC and all this other stuff?
What, you mean, just make it unlimited, is that what you're saying?
No, well, it seems like it's that way anyhow, even if you limit it here. It doesn't mean you can't get all this other money coming in.
Well, you can, yeah, I mean, there were independent expenditures, people do that. In this last campaign, I know the mayor set up, some of his friends set up an independent expenditure campaign which is not subject to limits. So yeah, I mean, it's sometimes you feel if you're involved in these issues that you're swimming upstream and the flow is very fast against you. But I do think that the $1,000 limit, now $1,100, has had a beneficial effect on council races and the mayor's race to some extent. I think if we close the loophole, at least that helps. They have to report who the money comes from. I don't think you need to spend as much money, by the way, to be successful running for office, but it's easy to, if these developers, they want important stuff like tax abatements and subsidies for their developments. And when the mayor's fundraiser calls up and says, we know you're interested in seeing the mayor reelected, aren't you? How many LLCs do you own? And let's see checks from each one of them. Maybe this will help, maybe this is a benefit to LLC owners who are tired of getting those shakedown calls, because it's probably very hard to say no when the mayor's fundraiser calls you up and it's important to get a tax abatement for your development to be successful.
Isn't it true that PACs, political action committees, are unregulated?
No.
No?
Not completely true. I mean, PACs can donate money to,
They've got a limit.
they've got a limit. I think it's a little bit larger than what an individual
I
can
think
donate.
it's 2,700,
Yeah.
but it's a limit.
Right, yeah, they have a limit in terms of, there is such a thing as an independent expenditure that a PAC can make or that individuals can make in support of a candidate, but they're regulated to the extent that they have to report the expenditures. And they have to indicate on their ads or flyers sort of who they came from. But it, like I said, it's like swimming upstream against this stuff.
May I ask you this? It's hard to find out what was spent by candidates for their reelection, or I have found it practically impossible. Used to, the Inquirer would publish after the election, probably exactly who spent what of council candidates and perhaps other candidates. The Board of Elections doesn't make it available online. Where is it?
Here's what I would say.
Okay.
For statewide candidates that file with the Ohio Secretary of State, all that stuff is available online. For local candidates, the Hamilton County Board of Elections has all that stuff. And it was I undertook the effort to monitor the mayor's spending in this last election, and I could get, if I would email over to the staff at the Hamilton County Board of Elections, the actual filings that the mayor's campaign made. And that includes who the contributions come from, what the expenditures were on, that sort of thing. And then you've got to do your own analysis. Now, I can tell you this, because I reviewed a lot of press clippings over the years about the original campaign finance amendment. The media used to report more on this.
Yes, that's exactly my point.
And part of, when Howard Wilkinson or his predecessors were at the Inquirer, they would write big articles on who was donating to who and how much money they spent. They would do it multiple times during the campaign. Now, the Inquirer, if you notice, they really only have about 2 or 3 reporters covering local news. Sherry Coolidge, nice lady, she wears multiple hats. Recently they had her covering a murder trial when they used to have a court reporter. So during that whole week or so that the murder trial was being covered, there was no real news printed about what's going on at City Hall. So as an example, these charter amendments that are on the ballot, as council was voting on it, there was no coverage of that. You didn't read about it in the Inquirer. Yeah, so I'm just saying part of the problem is the media. If you, to the extent you're relying on the Inquirer, they're just not writing much about news.
Well, I think it's terribly important for people to know what was spent by each candidate and as a whole. And what do you suggest how should people find it? Okay, I didn't succeed that way. Maybe it took them a long time.
Go to the Board of Elections.
To the offices.
The burden is almost on the opponents, to kind of police the other candidate, and then for people like me or you or others who are following this to use social media or other ways to get the news out.
I tried fairly long.
You have to physically go there.
Physically go there.
I'll do that next time.
They email them to me, so don't do that if you ask
You
them.
can email, or you can go there and get it's a public record.
It's a public record.
Just like who's registered to vote and who's not. And a lot of people are shocked. Oh, how do people know?
There's another charter amendment which should be on the ballot that was not covered in the news at all. The council voted 8-1 to put on the ballot the executive session for personnel matters and make it consistent with every other large city in the state of Ohio. And I think council's going to override it since it was 8-1. but the mayor vetoed it, and it has to be overridden to get it on the ballot, and we should read about that in the paper this week. It's the executive session, to allow, years ago, they would have executive session for personnel matters and for negotiations with unions and that sort of thing, and then the Inquirer sued them early in the 2000s, and won the case that should sunshine law is that everything has to be open and exposed, and no more than 3 members can meet together for any reason, and all this stuff about the city manager and the police chief and all that stuff really should be handled in an executive session, which is perfectly legal every place else in the state. Well, we have to put it into the charter, so that's going to be on the ballot unless something very strange happens.
Yeah, it seems to be headed that way unless somebody switches.
Let Don finish. Other question. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you, go ahead.
I was only going to ask how many in this room have a caution or a concern about 2-year term limits versus 4-year? Because my sense is that if you look at people who are elected for a 2-year term, once they're in, they'll have 1 year to learn and do the work of council, and then another year to prepare for their candidacy for winning again. If you have 4 years term, then you'll have a period for them to at least learn and work for 3 years and then spend a year preparing for their next election. So that's a concern to a lot of people.
It hasn't worked for the U.S. Congress. Had Shabbat, Wenstrup for how long?
They only have 2-year terms.
I know they're 2-year terms. They keep coming back again and again and again. So they spend more time campaigning or not.
No, not if they're gerrymandered districts, they don't
Right.
need to
Well, that's a good
Over and over again, like all of 1 year of the 2-year term.
You know,
What if they up the meritocratic value of the candidates?
Okay. Got the mic over here.
we're getting questions.
I'm sorry, I don't really have a question. I have retorts to several speakers, but I would say that that article about the executive session has already appeared in the Inquirer this week, I believe.
Well, has the council overridden the mayor?
I didn't see that in it.
They're
It
not
was
in
just a
regular
description of
session
the
now.
executive sessions.
They start back, now that it's September, they're back in regular session.
My general retort is I'm in favor of 2-year terms because I believe accountability for city council members is sadly lacking when they are elected at large as they are now. So the most money, the best recognition, the so-called beauty contest is what happens in city council races. So until we get a more direct way of holding city council members accountable, I'm in favor of them having 2-year terms.
I was just going to say. Oh, let's go here. She had a question. No, I forgot that. What if there were more citizen participation? What if there were more citizen participation? We don't really have participatory democracy in Cincinnati. We don't even have secular democracy in Cincinnati. We really don't have people holding them accountable through the newspaper or discussion or active board meetings or unit meetings. I mean, it's not so much voting and holding them, for the entire record for 2 or 4 years. There's just no day-to-day discussion on people of what's being done in government.
It
It's
takes
not representative
individuals.
government.
It takes individuals to be monitoring, I've been focusing on this campaign finance stuff. Other people need to focus on other issues and be nags and file lawsuits and complaints if they don't do their jobs. But the trouble is it's hard to fit that into most of our lives. But I think it takes energy and perspicacity, is that how you pronounce that? Yeah, right, exactly.
If we're giving opinions, I'm in favor of the 4-year staggered. I was in favor of 4-year staggered when we first went to 4-year instead of all 9 at once. One of the things is you still would have accountability because you'd still have an election every 2 years. It would just be a different, and you'd have as many new people running every 2 years, so that gives more people a chance to run because the election is still every 2 years. It's just for either that's how our school board is. That's how pretty much every other city council or trustees race in the state is it's staggered terms. Look at the county commission, look at any of the trustees in, Springfield Township or anything else. They're all staggered terms so that you don't lose all your experience in one time. And it still ends up with an election every 2 years for accountability.
There's one more thing on the ballot,
Yes.
right? One more thing, and Greg Landsman started to talk about it. Last week, and I shut him down because it's his baby. There's a group of people that want to create a police and safety school on the west side of town. They have never gone to the state to see whether it's even legal. They have never talked to the Cincinnati Board of Education or anyone from CPS to see only after the fact. Talk to Melanie Bates. Talk to Melanie Bates. Only after the fact did they do that. If they're going to present it as vocational education, they have to have state certified people in vocational education to teach the course. They want to create their own curriculum. Well, kids are not going to come through with an industry credential if you're not teaching the industry curriculum. And it also will not get an industry curriculum certificate if it is not taught by someone who has that. And bringing in police and fire to classes to speak to them does not meet that need. This is a problem. They're saying it's a racial issue, that we're not giving enough opportunities for African Americans. But if you're going to have it at Western Hills High School, I cannot see kids from Evanston getting on a Metro bus first thing in the morning, going downtown, transferring, and getting all the way out to West High for 2-hour ride in the morning, 2-hour ride in the afternoon to get there. I don't see it happening. But the West Siders, who definitely want police and safety, they tend to be white. So therefore, it is not a racial issue. So this is a real concern of mine, because we don't even know if it's legal. And I encourage you to do a lot of research on it.
Hi, Pat Burns here, State Board of Education. I'm on executive committee for the Hamilton County. I'm on executive committee for Hamilton County Democratic Party. I'm a precinct exec in 25F. With all due respect, the way that was initially presented for us to vote on, we abstained to vote on it because this is not how you do best practices, evidence-based research. And I want to tell you that that's not how we do it at the State Department, at least these days now. Putting together a high-quality curriculum that really gives kids the knowledge and skills that they need to actually be successful and then in the next step of their life after graduation, which is what we're all about, is not done this way. And I'm a personal friend of Greg Landsman. I'm going to say that. But I did not understand one word of how that was described to us at that meeting, and therefore I could not vote for it. You can't just come to a meeting and assume that people are going to rubber stamp big ideas like this that have long-term ramifications for kids and their families and communities. I think all of your points, Katie, are really well taken. We're working really closely with the Governor's Transformation Workforce and Attainment 2025. We've developed something called the Ohio Means Jobs Readiness Seal. It's a whole internship project. But the point is, these are industry credentials that if you don't have the actually industry credential and you've not passed the tests, you can't even go and be eligible for any new recruiting and in either fire or health safety arenas. So this is not just someone putting together a curriculum because somebody locally has an idea, good idea. Yeah. So we need a lot more research on this.
Thanks, Pat Bruns, for State Board of Education.
Thank you, Pat.
So this is going to be on the city ballot?
Yes.
Why?
Charter amendment. What the amendment, well,
How is it a charter? How does it affect the city?
what the charter amendment says, according to what I've read of the language, is if CPS sets up this academy, and it uses CPS, so it's not, here's how CPS is going to do it, it's if CPS sets up this safety academy and people graduate from it, they will get 5 extra points on civil service exams. That's what the amendment says.
They can't.
It doesn't say that here's how you're going to set up the, I mean, when we voted on it at the executive committee, it was voted on under that understanding, is that what it says is if they set up this safety program, then, and the reason it's a city charter amendment is because it's talking about civil service credits. And it's to give those students from inner city schools a leg up with those 5 extra points to hopefully get appointed to police, fire, whatever. So the reason it's a charter amendment is because it's relating to civil service points.
It's premature.
Well, but it doesn't say, we know they're gonna set it up, or when they're gonna set it. It says if they set it up. Anyhow, that was the reason that most of us at that meeting did vote for it, because it was, if this, then that.
But our question is, does city council have control over civil service exams? Is that legal? Is that legal?
Yes.
Civil service.
City civil service, they do.
As long as you're talking about civil service exams, there is another issue that's going to be on the ballot, which is to give veterans, any veteran, 5 bonus points on the civil service exam for police and fire. Currently, we have Ohio veterans get 5 bonus points, and they want to expand it, hoping that that will attract veterans to move to Cincinnati because they have 5 points up on their civil service exam. What's interesting about that is 3 veterans on council, David Mann and Wendell Young, and who's the third one? But the 3 vets voted down. They did not like that. They thought Ohio benefits were enough.
Martin.
And there's actually a special meeting going on right now on that, and Thursday at 2 o'clock down at council. They're asking people to come down. But his objective was to make sure that they could get some additional points for inner city kids, because you do get, veterans do get 5 points when they take the civil service test. So the objective was not to create the curriculum, but to start the conversation as to how inner city kids can continue to get the position on police and fire, because it's been slacking and a lot of suburban kids have been getting those jobs. So to give some incentive for inner city kids so that they can be hired as on to police and fire. I'm actually a lieutenant for the fire department myself.
I'm wondering why they didn't go to Cincinnati Public Schools, because our vocational schools, Queen City Vocational Center had police and fire, and I can't remember all the other retired firemen or policemen, but Handy Matthews taught policing at Queen City Vocational Center. And so there has to be a history of some kind of vocational curriculum for that. And see if they work with Cincinnati Public School. I think that'd be a better route.
I don't want to take up too much time, but since we have an expert in the room, I'd like to ask a question. But the civil service exam is after you've earned the credential.
Right.
Well, the civil service is
Wait a minute. Hang on a second.
I want to make sure I understand that correctly.
Yes, they were saying that they could get the training, and if they went through the training, then it will allow them to have 5 additional points when they take the civil service exam, which is the first part of the examination for the hiring process. So,
But you have to have a credential in hand to be eligible to be in the hiring process.
right,
Okay, so see okay, they're kind of getting the cart before
for
the
the
horse.
horse, right.
Okay, good.
I guess I was gonna,
I got it.
I was gonna say what you just said, which is the cart seems to be before the horse. If Cincinnati Public Schools creates a program like this, and if in fact it has the features and qualities and depth of curriculum that would help someone do a better job as a policeman or a fireman, then the idea of giving them some credit would make some sense. But I think CPS ought to do that work first, and then we have the vote on whether or not to give them the credit, once you know what the curriculum's gonna be. That would be the way I would vote on it, but I can understand how other people see it as a no harm, no foul sort of thing.
I have a question. Coordinating, some young people in Cincinnati were dropping out of high school and joining the Red Cross. Is that its service program? Is that the case? And then going into formal training and recognition and certification, or no? I mean, could they still coordinate with Red Cross, even if there's an academy here?
Sure they could.
Training? And that would take care of some of the little people who can't get across town, or if there's some interim coordination that might help. And well, the Red Cross does have formal review, whatever.
Okay, looks like you get to kick off.
Okay, I think we've covered it all, and I didn't even know about this other civil service. Is there an amendment on the ballot? Okay, so how many amendments we got now? We got 5?
Yeah.
Potentially? Yeah, okay. That's a lot of charter amendments, folks. You're gonna get confused, so, you know, do your thinking and reading before you show up at the ballot box.
Read the League of Women Voters, who and what of elections,
Exactly.
explanation
Someone
of
will
for,
explain.
arguments for and against.
Thanks for everybody for listening to me drone on. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
We need to finish up the food. Again, you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you for your participation. Have a good day.